Hi, my name is Elizabeth Franklin, and I'm head of U.S. Public Affairs and Patient Advocacy and Oncology with Sanofi. We're here today to talk about Sanofi's approach to value and value assessment in healthcare. And I'm so lucky to be joined by my colleague, our global head of health economics and value assessment, Kyle Hvidsten.
Very nice to be with you.
Absolutely. Kyle, so can we start off? I would love for you to tell us a bit more about your job as global head of health economics and value assessment here at Sanofi.
Well, thank you. Um, and hello, everyone. I'm Kyle Hvidsten, as Elizabeth said, head of health economics and value assessment. That's a scientific function that generates evidence that's primarily used in the reimbursement process, both in the US and around the world.
Awesome. That was a good way, a succinct way of putting it. But
Thank you.
Kyle really is our expert in value assessment, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, we want to start with what do we mean by value in healthcare? That can be a term that is nebulous, that is not necessarily understood in the same way by different people. So, Kyle, when we talk about value, what do we mean?
What do we mean by value? The concept of value is an elusive one. Depending on who you ask, the answer could be very different. We at Sanofi, and particularly in health economics and value assessment, think about value as a general concept, one that can be defined in terms of what something is worth and who is to decide what something is worth. In a capitalist society, what something is worth is usually defined by what someone is willing to pay for it. If it's a shirt, if it's a car, the price and the willingness to pay could vary tremendously. And consumers make choices based on their personal values. And manufacturers of these items set the market price based on what they feel the consumer is willing to pay. However, what's important to remember is when it comes to everyday purchases, we as consumers generally have enough information about the purchase and we can decide for ourselves what we're willing to pay. This is a very different concept in healthcare, where the purchaser is typically not the patient and is making a decision on behalf of the patient and trying to understand what their preferences, interests, and values are. It's worth mentioning that even to try to anticipate a patient's values and interests is to look at a patient very simplistically. They all have different preferences, values, and interests.
Absolutely. Yeah, you see one patient and you've seen one patient, right? And oftentimes we talk about it in oncology, but when we think about value, we also think about value across multiple therapeutic areas, like all of the ones that Sanofi works in.
That's right.
So, all right. So we know now a little bit more about what value is when it comes to healthcare. We often talk about, especially in health economics and value assessment, that latter part of the
Mhm.
term. So what is value assessment, and why is it important to the overall healthcare system?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, and this does explain half of my title. So, value assessment is a scientific process. I mentioned that HEVA, or Health Economics and Value
Mhm.
Assessment, is a scientific function. So, our goal is to search in an unbiased way for the truth about disease,
Mhm.
the truth about our medicines. And so, value assessment is an attempt to take those individualistic preferences and values of patients
Mhm.
and approach them scientifically. The goal is to achieve a more just, equitable healthcare system through the use of evidence, logic, and reason. So that's the idea of value
Mhm.
assessment and the role we hope it plays in healthcare decision making, both in treatment choices and in coverage
Mhm.
and in reimbursement. There are more demands on this healthcare system than ever. We have an aging population in the US, and that is not unique to the developed world. And there are higher expectations of the healthcare system. What we accepted as part of life is now something we can treat and possibly even cure. So while it's such an exciting time, we're living in the golden age of medical innovation, how to pay for this, how to use finite healthcare
Mhm.
resources is something that value assessment seeks to do. The stakes are high.
Mhm.
This is more important than choosing between shirts and choosing between cars.
Right.
We're ultimately informing life and death decisions.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so key that we define what value is based on how patients define value, because ultimately it comes down, like you said, it's a life and death decision. So you talked at the top of our conversation about living in a capitalist society. So that
Indeed.
makes me think about the way that healthcare is valued in the United States versus other countries. So you are the global head, you're the
Hmm.
king of the world.
If
Um,
only.
and we know that health technology assessment or value assessment differs in the United States than it does in other parts of the world. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure, it certainly does. And it makes my job interesting on a daily basis. So the US is still unique in not having a national health technology assessment system.
Mhm.
There is something similar to that in development by Medicare, and we're watching that evolve.
Yep.
But all of these, so what exists outside the US as the norm and what is developing in the US is an attempt to achieve that more just, that more scientifically based assessment of patient values and healthcare decision making. So that's how the US is different. I think what has made the US different is a reluctance to accept that science can measure patient values, can measure what's most important, and present it as scientific evidence.
Okay. And do you feel like we're moving towards a system where that is the case in the United States?
We absolutely are. The US is facing the same healthcare spending challenge, and it is an urgent challenge with high expectations that the rest of the world is facing. A group that's growing in importance in the US is the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, known as ICER, which is unlike the national government-based systems, is a private organization that has certainly elevated the role of evidence in healthcare decision making. Their goal, and it's a shared objective of many, including Sanofi, is to achieve a more just, more equitable healthcare system
Mhm.
through the use of evidence in a compassionate, judicious way. So we're interacting with ICER regularly and understanding how they determine value. We've applauded them for providing a value assessment framework that really makes very clear and very transparent, embodying the principles of good science of what they're looking for and what they see as value.
And that's a good teaser because we will
Mm.
have ICER's president, Sarah Amen, join us in a little bit to talk about more in terms of what ICER does and how they make those decisions. But we wanted to make sure that we laid the groundwork for how Sanofi makes decisions about value first. So, what do you think, Kyle, in terms of how Sanofi thinks about value as we are bringing these innovative new treatments? Oftentimes, we talk about wanting to be best in class or first in class
Mhm.
when it comes to medications. So, how are we thinking about value when we're bringing those products to market?
Well, I'll say Sanofi thinks of value the way a fish thinks of water. It's everything to us. So it'll be hard to put it in words, but it's something we take very seriously. We look at the value of our medicines objectively and critically at each stage in clinical development. When we pass the important gate between early development and late development, we do scrutinize the value and ensure that we are meeting our own standards for first in class or best in class. And then we often talk to HTAs or health technology assessment organizations in the US and outside the US where they provide the opportunity. We will show them why we believe this is a unique and important and special medicine. And we're open to their feedback. We prepare for those interactions with our customers by developing a spirit of openness and a willingness to listen rather than bring any of our own beliefs into that discussion. And it never fails to inform us in important and meaningful ways so that ultimately what we're bringing to patients is something unique, urgent, and important.
And at the heart of that work, I know you mentioned this earlier, but we talk quite a bit about evidence. And that's really what's at the heart of value assessment from your perspective. Can you talk about Sanofi's approach to evidence?
Sure. I think the principle we aspire to of any good scientist is to be the greatest critics of our own theories. So, what evidence, the interpretation of the evidence has to be without bias. And this is why that orthogonal view, meaning many can see something differently, see the same thing from different
Sure.
perspectives, our openness to those perspectives.
Mhm.
What challenges us in terms of the standards of scientific evidence is what we talked about earlier, which are the deeply personal and important views of patients that are not all the same.
Absolutely.
So, the ability to prove something to ourselves and to others when it's something very real, but difficult to quantify, difficult to measure,
Absolutely.
is really the challenge of value assessment. And Sanofi wants and needs to be a part of meeting that challenge going forward.
So, Kyle, we have talked through the years about the principles that we have when it comes to our approach to value at Sanofi. Can you tell us a little bit about those principles?
The principles of value that we hold so seriously are the shift that we feel is urgent towards a value-driven healthcare system.
Mhm.
We're not the only ones advocating this, but we have that same urgency that patient groups and hopefully HTAs have demonstrated. As we've discussed, value is a multifaceted concept, and developing scientific evidence fit for a value assessment has to reflect this. It requires us to do more listening than speaking, and listening to the people who know, who truly are the experts. And this is why patient experiences, perspectives, and priorities must be meaningfully incorporated through a value assessment.
Absolutely.
Value assessment should be transparent to all stakeholders. If we speak in terms of scientific jargon, it alienates those who are most important,
Right.
and intimidates those we are trying to bring into this discussion instead of away from it. The diversity of patient populations is underappreciated. It's critical to understand and incorporate that when we're talking to different patients, we're hearing different things. We should only reach conclusion on that endeavor when we start hearing the same things again and again. Patients and patient advocates need to have access to the information we use. Again, I think the greatest challenge is when professionals engaged in this process start talking to one another. They alienate those who are most important to the process, the patients, and those who care for them the greatest.
Absolutely. So it sounds like a process that is exhaustive, transparent, and incorporates all of the voices necessary to make those assessments for everybody being impacted by the disease or the medicine.
It should be nothing less
Yeah.
for it to be successful.